Hey guys, it's Greg with Apple Explained, and I don't know if you realize it or not, but Apple is currently facing one of their worst nightmares, declining iPhone sales. And that has led to the company issuing their first profit warning in 16 years, which means the amount of revenue Apple told investors they'd earn in the fourth quarter of 2018 actually turned out to be inaccurate. So the company had to issue a warning, letting shareholders know that they actually made $9 billion less than they originally forecasted. And in this video, I'm going to talk about how Apple ended up in this nightmare and what they might do in the future to recover. Now, this video was the first place winner of this week's voting poll, and if you didn't get to vote, make sure you're subscribed. That way, the voting polls will show up right in your mobile activity feed, and you can let me know which video you'd like to see next. Now, I want to start off the video by walking you guys through the series of unfortunate events that led to Apple being in the tough position they're in today. And I think the first domino fell back in 2014 with the realization that the smartphone market was becoming saturated, since that's when growth started to decline dramatically across all smartphone manufacturers. And the biggest reason for this is that by 2014, most people who wanted a smartphone already bought one, so the number of customers shopping for a smartphone began to dwindle. Apple recognized this trend and knew they needed a strategy to counteract the slowdown, so they came up with a few different plans. First, Apple began to focus aggressively on the Chinese market, mainly because China was Apple's fastest growing source of revenue, and the company saw an opportunity to capture even more market share. Not to mention, China has the most mobile phone users on the planet, with India coming in second. The Verge even said China was the key to sustaining the iPhone's remarkable growth. And now that the Chinese smartphone market and overall economy is slowing, the effect it's having on Apple is undeniable. But China wasn't Apple's only strategy. The company also began implementing price hikes in 2015 in order to make more money from less sales. It started with some of their accessories like the Magic Mouse, which not only became about 15% more expensive, but carried a $20 premium for the space gray color. And in 2016, Apple introduced new MacBook Pros along with a $200 price increase for no apparent reason. But 2017 was when Apple really began pushing the boundary of what their customers were willing to pay with the iPhone X. You see, ever since the iPhone 4, Apple had always offered their flagship model iPhone for the unsubsidized price of $650. But this changed in 2017, when Apple decided to release two new models of iPhone at the same time, the iPhone 8 and the iPhone X. The 8 was priced at $700, which was already more expensive than the previous iPhone 7, and the iPhone X was priced $300 more at $1,000, marking the first time customers had to drop $1,000 to get the best iPhone Apple had to offer. But if you thought that was bad, 2018 was even worse, with Apple raising the prices of almost every product they upgraded. And remember, these responses were all due to slowing sales of the iPhone, which Apple knew was dangerous since the iPhone accounts for 60% of the company's revenue. So by growing their appeal in China and making other products in addition to the iPhone more profitable, Apple thought they'd still be able to post record-breaking quarters despite slowing sales. But now we know that isn't the case, since Tim Cook had to issue a statement correcting their revenue numbers for the fourth quarter of 2018 from $93 billion to $84 billion, which marked a year-over-year decline that frightened investors. But before we go any further, I should mention that $84 billion is still a huge amount of revenue, and Apple's definitely not in any financial trouble just because of a weaker than expected fourth quarter. But this is a sign that something more serious may be in store for Apple. And when you consider all the different factors at play, you begin to understand why many people are worried for the company, especially considering that the majority of Apple's revenues comes from one product line, the iPhone. So how exactly did Apple end up with a disappointing fourth quarter? Well, let's take a look at the reasons Tim Cook provided. He put the majority of the blame onto China, saying, "We did not foresee the magnitude of the economic deceleration, particularly in Greater China. In fact, most of our revenue shortfall to our guidance and over 100% of our year-over-year worldwide revenue decline occurred in Greater China across iPhone, Mac, and iPad." Now, it's true that China's economy is slowing, but I wonder if there's another layer to this story that Apple isn't mentioning. because the fourth quarter is also when the new iPhone XS and XR went on sale. And maybe Apple expected better sales performance of those devices, but was disappointed to find out many customers in China didn't want to pay the iPhone's premium price, especially considering they have so many other affordable options. And market saturation in China is likely another culprit. The Chinese market did grow quickly during the early days of the iPhone, but that growth has come to a halt, just like in the US, since many people who wanted a smartphone already own one. The problem is the majority didn't choose iPhone. And that's probably because people in China use an app called WeChat to do almost everything they need, from paying for groceries to chatting with friends, rather than using iOS-based services like Apple Pay or iMessage. So most Chinese customers simply buy an affordable Huawei phone to use WeChat, since the experience inside the app is essentially the same. Now, Cook also put the blame on carriers for offering less subsidies on the iPhone, which I think reinforces the fact that iPhones are too expensive to begin with, since he's essentially saying that if prices were cheaper through subsidies, Apple would have sold more iPhones. And the company actually tried imitating a subsidy by advertising the iPhone's trade-in price, but apparently that hasn't worked out too well, considering the majority of customers don't have the more recent iPhone 7 Plus that would qualify them for the $450 trade-in. And the final place Cook put the blame was on their $30 battery replacement program, which allowed users to receive a battery replacement from Apple if their select iPhone's battery was at least 80% degraded. Apparently, users who swapped out their iPhone's battery had a detrimental effect on sales of the XS and XR. And I find this rationale to be a bit strange, because I imagine someone who planned on upgrading to the iPhone XS would simply see the battery replacement program as a bonus, not as a reason to keep their old phone for another year. And it also implies two things about Apple. First, they didn't make the new iPhones appealing enough for users to upgrade, and two, degrading batteries did in fact serve as a form of planned obsolescence. But I don't think those reasons, as true as they may be, would cause such an unexpected drop in iPhone sales. So let me share what I believe are the more consequential factors. First, we have to recognize that the iPhone XS is perhaps the most unremarkable iPhone release since the 3GS. It doesn't have any major new features, and the addition of a larger, even more expensive model means nothing to the average consumer. And at a starting price of $1,000, the XS needs at least one amazing headlining feature to add value. And this isn't even considering the fact that many customers already dropped $1,000 on the iPhone X in 2017, so they're hoping that device lasts them a lot longer than 1 year. So while China's economy may be slowing, I think it's more likely that Apple priced themselves out of the Chinese market, and now they're suffering the consequences. So now that we've discussed how Apple ended up in this situation, I want to talk about what Apple might do to recover in the future. And I think there's a short-term solution and a long-term solution. For the short term, Apple should focus on markets that have not reached the same levels of saturation as the US and China. Places like the Middle East, India, Latin America, and Africa all remain areas of untapped potential for Apple. But there are barriers of entry that they'd have to overcome in order to compete. For example, in India, the import taxes or tariffs on foreign smartphones has been on the rise, and Apple actually tried to negotiate for lower tariffs back in 2017 when the rate was set at 15%, but India actually did the exact opposite and increased their smartphone tariff to 20%. Which means today, the starting price of an iPhone XS in India is over $1,400. So it's obvious that Apple has a lot of work to do in these markets, and I think introducing a modern budget iPhone like the SE would really help boost Apple's sales in these locations. But even if Apple is successful in India or the Middle East, it's only a matter of time before market saturation becomes an issue again, since it is an unavoidable problem with virtually any product. And that brings me to the long-term solution. Apple either has to introduce a product that cannibalizes the iPhone, similar to how the iPhone cannibalized the iPod, or revolutionize the iPhone in such a dramatic way that it essentially appears to be a new product. Because even though the original iPhone cost almost twice as much as its competition upon release, customers were still lining up outside Apple stores for days to buy it. So Apple has to do the same thing again in order to generate the excitement necessary to sell a high volume of expensive devices. And I think Apple already knows this. They're just stuck waiting on that next big technological breakthrough that'll set their product apart from anything we've seen before. Now before I end the video, I have some pretty exciting news. This channel has received its first major sponsor, and that's Honey, a free browser extension that automatically finds promo codes and applies them at the checkout on over 37,000 websites, so you know you're getting the lowest price possible. Now, I'm so happy they decided to sponsor this channel because I actually started using Honey after seeing it on Shane Dawson's videos, and it just saved me almost $100 in total on furniture for my new apartment. It has over 100,000 5-star reviews on the Google Chrome store and only took 2 clicks to install, so there's literally no reason not to use Honey for everything you buy online. Again, it's free and you can install it in just 2 clicks. Get Honey for free at joinhoney.com/apple. That's joinhoney.com/apple. Alright you guys, so that's Apple's worst nightmare, and if you want to vote for the next video topic, don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.